So ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, panelists, and colleagues, my name is Jean d'Aragon. I'm the Senior Sustainable Development Expert at the UN Office for Sustainable Development, UNOSD, in Incheon, Republic of Korea. Welcome and thank you all for joining this fourth and final session of the Executive Training Course for Policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The general objective of this training course is to build the knowledge, skills, mindsets, and general capacities of member states for implementing sustainable development through planning, policy making, policy shaping with an integrated approach. The course, organized by UNOSD, which is part of the UNDESA Division for Sustainable Development Goals, is closely linked to the next High Political Forum for Sustainable Development, or HLPF, that will take place in New York in July 2022. We hope that this training course will help you achieve a better understanding of the successes, challenges, lessons learned, and good practices related to the implementation of the SDGs, and particularly SDGs 4 on quality education, 5 on gender equality, 14, life below water, 15, life on land, and 17 on partnership for the goal, which are the 5 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, that will go under in-depth review through the voluntary national reviews, or VNRs, during the HLPF next July. The first 3 sessions held on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday focused on SDG 4, as quality education, SDG 5 on gender equality, and SDG 14, life below water, while also looking at the SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, across as a cross-cutting all the teams under review. Today, the session will be dedicated to SDG 15 on life on land, while also integrating SDG 17 related to the partnerships for the goals. We'll hear about the current state of the world's land and water resources for food and agriculture. We also will hear about small land holdings and their contribution to SDGs 14 with integrating the policy point of view. Then we'll have a presentation on partnerships for environmental protection and life on land with reference to the Stockholm Plus 50. And another one presentation will be ecosystem security and sustainable food production, with focus on the experience from China. And last but not the least, we'll have SDG 15, life on land from a youth perspective. So without further ado, I would like to move on and then starting with introducing the facilitator, moderator for this session. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Raymond Saner, Professor Titular Organization and International Management at the University of Basel. Mr. Saner is co-founder of the Center for Socio-Economic Development, known as CSEND, which is a Geneva-based non-governmental research and development organization with ECOSOC accreditation and consultative status since 1993. Mr. Saner's involvement with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development goes back many years now. He has been involved with the 2030 Agenda member expert group meeting on global sustainable development in 2013, as a member of the EGM or agenda setting for the HLPF on the post-2015 development agenda in 2014. He has been moderator during the second HLPF meeting under the auspices of ECOSOC in 2015. He is the author of a chapter on science policy interface and member of the EGM of the GSDR report 2015. Drafter of the chapter 6 on countries with special focus on LLDCs, SIDS, and LLDCs. So landlocked, least developing countries, small island developing states, and landlocked developing countries. member of the EGM of the Global Sustainable Development Report 2015, speaker and discussant of the People's First PPPs for UNISC in 2016, and the keynote speaker at the UN Conference on Financing of SDGs in Jamaica in 2017. This is just a few things. You can read also his biography on our website. Mr. Saner has been collaborating with UNOSD also for some years. He has provided support to our office for the organization and holding of the executive training in the past. It's an honor to have him again this year. And Mr. Saner will introduce the theme of this session and will also introduce the speakers before they make their presentation. Mr. Saner, Raymond, Professor, with this short introduction, I'm going to turn it over to you. You may take the floor.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you, Dr. Jean d'Aragon. Jean, it's been a pleasure to working together, and just thinking about what you have said about what I've been doing. I think I'd like to put this on the side, because today I will be again learning even more about what sustainable development is all about, thanks to the wonderful speakers that we have been able to invite to participate and to share their knowledge. Let me start in my role as mediator just to emphasize a few points. I'll also share with you the results of the evaluation, and not the questionnaire that was sent out previously by my colleague, Dr. Lichia, who you will get to know later on today during our session. So let's start with a first slide. Can we move on to the next one? Yeah. A few things for people who haven't followed SDG 15 in more detail. And as I said before, of course, the speakers will say much more than what this is just meant to be a sort of a starting point to look at some of the issues that need to be addressed by our decision makers. The first one about life on land, and what needs to be done in red are the so-called major challenges, meaning countries who are facing a lot of work that needs to be done to follow on the implementation of SDG 15. As you could see, basically the whole planet Earth and the countries are more or less in the red. Some less so, but overall the impression is just tremendous. There's plenty of work that needs to be done. Next one. Just now looking at one aspect of life on land, forests, or the negative side, deforestation. There are areas on our planet Earth where there is less problems to be solved. But again, if you look at South America and parts of Africa, also Southeast Asia, we're back in the red. There's plenty of very serious issues about cutting down the trees, to put it bluntly, and how to reforest areas that unfortunately have suffered from overdoing of deforestation. Next one. So if we look at species populate our planet, and the disappearance or the threat of disappearance of some of the species, again, unfortunately, the color red figures quite strongly. In some countries and continents more than in others, but it is a threat, and it's part of also biodiversity, with the disappearance of animals that are unfortunately not being able to be saved into the next generation. We're losing not just diversity, but we're losing biodiversity. And some of the speakers will say more about that. Next one. Now, the biodiversity and the terrestrial sites that are key, that are very important to safeguard biodiversity. Again, unfortunately, we're back in the red. There is a threat to the safeguarding of biodiversity for the future. It's a serious threat. We're so happily going ahead as business as usual, which of course also has as its negative results that we are not taking enough care of safeguarding biodiversity. Next one. And freshwater. The current issue, we had yesterday the session on SDG 14. We learned a lot. That's not only an issue about depletion of fish stocks in the oceans and plastics and pollution. There's also a lot to be addressed regarding aquaculture, rivers, pollution of the rivers, and maybe in that sense safeguarding the survival of humanity if our river waters become polluted and can no longer be used just for human consumption. We're in great difficulties. Next one. Now the survey results let us know the following. That's the reflection of people who participated in this survey. Next one. So we asked the question, when implementing SDG 15, which ministry is responsible, should be responsible to implement SDG 15? The great majority thought it would be the Ministry of Environment, if there is a Ministry of Environment. And then came planning, land planning, and management, and others spread through other ministries such as agriculture, forestry, and so on. Now, this brings up, of course, the issue in countries where there is no Ministry of Environment, or environment is part of another ministry. Then the issue becomes how can SDG 15 be implemented if several other ministries are also participating in either finding solutions or partially are causing the problems that we try to remedy through SDG 15 implementation. Next, we had the question, which of the following SDG 15 targets listed below have been a challenge for your country? And you see circled at the bottom, the number one issue was reported was target 15.1. It's up in red. I read it briefly. It's supposed to be to ensure conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of territorial and inland freshwater ecosystems and their services. Also, forests, wetlands, mountains, and drylands, in line with obligations under international agreements. It's a very good hint. There are already international agreements which take care of some of the problems or some of the issues that are listed in the Target 15.1, but sometimes some countries haven't signed up to the international agreements, or oftentimes I find people don't even know that there are, for instance, multilateral environmental agreements and what they are all about. The second most cited issue is Target 15.9, just at the bottom. 15.9 is about by 2020, we should have integrated ecosystems and biodiversity values, which should be part of our national and local planning and development processes. And then we should have also poverty reduction strategies and accounts. Now, this is by 2020, as we all know, we're now in 2022. And unfortunately, to some extent, many of our countries are lagging behind doing as stated here in terms of the targets definition, what is supposed to be done. So ideally, our time spent today listening to each other and talking and discussing should help bring more momentum in our country to do what is supposed to be done, which is to have more planning at national and local level to implement SDG 15. Next one. So the barriers to achieving SDG 15, what are they? One is the most difficult one to overcome, and 5 is easier to overcome. It turned out that the most difficult one is to collect scientific data and technical information that would help us to respond effectively to issues about land, life on land. This is a serious issue, but it could be solved. You know, if we have the appropriate statistical authorities with people trained, with tools available to measure, we could do much more. But to some extent, in some of our countries, the statistical abilities to gather data and analyze data is not yet up to speed. Next one is the lack of resources to act. Then lack of coordinated policy and coherence to achieve sustainable changes. That's true for most of the SDGs. Well, they are interdependent. They link with each other and sometimes lead to policy trade-offs. So we have to figure out how to get our ministries to work together to have a coherent approach to the SDG implementation. Finally, it's insufficient knowledge and capacity to intervene. Next one. Well, about the SDG 17, that's also one of the SDGs that we're going to be discussing today. Some even very much so. I'm thinking of Jan-Gustav. Well, SDG 17 is about partnerships. Now, how could we better partner with other countries to lift this whole planet Earth up and forward, and to share what we can share with others? And you see here we're listed, for instance, target 17.18, which is to basically increase high quality, timely, and reliable data. And the rest is listed there. I'm basically repeating what was said before, based on the people who participated in the questionnaire. More data and more reliable data is absolutely necessary. The next one is 17.3, which is mobilize additional financial resources. This is key because today a good number, I would say, of the least developed countries are highly indebted. Highly indebted means they have to pay the interest rates for the debt that they have accumulated, which means, in other words, also there's less money available to invest for SDG implementation. So they're depending on help, and it's in the best interest, of course, of the developed countries to help them, because if things go wrong in parts of the world, we all get to suffer consequences. Finally, 17.6, it's about north-south, south-south cooperation. That is, I think, evident. Next one, let's move on. Yeah, now, the speakers for today, I will introduce each one of them one by one. And let me start first with Feras Ziadat. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, we have the great honor to have his presence with us. He has been working in related fields when it comes to SDG 15, particularly when it comes to desertification, when it comes to integrating land and water systems. His background coming from Jordan, of course, he already experienced the issues of desertification, of the importance to save water in terms of quality of water and accessibility of water for people who need to have access to water. But he has been also an associate professor at the University of Jordan. He's now with the FAO, and before he had other functions. Now he is responsible for the flagship report, The State of the World's Land and Water Resources for Food and Agriculture. And he's also the chair of the UN Coalition on Combating Sand and Dust Storms. Just as a closing note, I'm living in Geneva, and we have again had a few days where the skies turned a little bit yellow because we have what's called sirocco, where some of the sand from the North African deserts come up all the way to our part of Europe. There is especially the issue when it comes to desertification. Of course, we'll be facing more such problems. But without much further ado, I hand over to you, and I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. And I would like first to welcome all the participants and to thank the organizers and the panelists for allowing us for this opportunity to present the main findings of the flagship report on the state of the world's land and water resources for food and agriculture. And this is an FAO Land and Water Division work and results, and it touches upon main SDGs such as food, SDG 2, SDG 6 on water, SDG 15 on land, and several other SDGs. So it's a collaborative work with a lot of partners who are working on the land and water, and of course the SDGs related to land and water and food security. Next slide, please. In 2011, FAO published the first report on the state of the world's land and water resources for food and agriculture, and it is known as SOLAR. Recent assessment projections and scenarios point to the accelerated trends in the depletion of land and water resources and associated loss of biodiversity and key ecosystem functions. The objective of SOLAR 2021 is therefore to build awareness of the status of land and water resources, highlighting the risks and informing on related opportunities and challenges. SOLAR 2021 provides new information on the status of land, soil, and water resources, and evidence of the changing and alarming trends in resources use. Next, please. The growing demand for food is placing pressure on land, soil, and water resources. FAO estimates agriculture in 2050 will need to produce almost 50% more food, feed, and biofuel than it did in 2012. In 2020, however, between 720 and 811 million people faced hunger. Recognition and actions are needed to redirect the focus onto the land, which produce over 95% of the world's food. To do this, information on the status of land, soil, and water resources, and evidence of the changing and alarming trends in resource use are needed. SOLAR is a response to this. Next, please. Agricultural land area declined by 128 million hectares since 2000. Land under irrigation has increased by 53 million hectares, while under permanent meadows and pastures declined 191 million hectares. Rapid growth in urban areas has displaced all types of agricultural land use. Other land increased by 220 million hectares since 2000. Next, please. As agriculture intensifies, converging evidence indicates the extent and severity of land degradation, where soil is eroded, nutrients are depleted, and salinity increases. Human-induced degradation affect 34% of the agricultural land, extending cultivation into areas of marginal land equality and increasing intensification on existing cropland are constrained by soil erosion and depletion of carbon, nutrients, and soil biodiversity. Next, please. Between 2000 and 2018, the decline in global agricultural land per capita was about 20%. Water stress is high in all basins with intense irrigated agriculture and densely populated cities, particularly where available freshwater resources are sparse due to climatic conditions. Next slide, please. Farming systems are polarizing. Large-scale commercial holdings dominate agricultural land use, concentrating many millions of smallholders on land susceptible to degradation and water scarcity. The number of farms is highly skewed towards small holdings, with 84% of farms being below 2 hectares, which occupy only 12% of the world's farmland. Thus, policy interventions of land management need to address this. The continued validity and viability of smallholders is critical for local food security in many low-income countries. Next slide, please. Land, soil, and water management need to find better synergy to keep systems in play. Human-induced land degradation and water scarcity raise risk levels for agricultural production and ecosystem services. Climate change adds uncertainty to the agroclimatic risks facing producers. Next slide, please. Land and water resources will need safeguarding. There is now only a narrow margin for reversing trends in resource deterioration and depletion. Safeguarding land and water resources is essential to maintain the required rates of agricultural growth without further compromising the generation of environmental services. Next slide, please. Land and water governance has to be inclusive and adaptive. Inclusive governance is essential for allocating and managing natural resources. Technical solutions to mitigate land degradation and water scarcity are unlikely to succeed without it. Planning and managing land, soil, and water resources through effective land and water governance are needed. Next, please. Planning can define critical thresholds in natural resources systems leading to reversal of land degradation. Planning needs to be wrapped up as packages of technical, institutional, governance, and financial support. Any advance in transforming food systems to meet future demand will require a focus on land and water resources planning. Monitoring the effects of climate change in relation to agroecological suitability will prove essential for planning resources use along the entire food value and supply chain. The land suitability is expected and the crop suitability is expected to change as a result of climate change, and this needs to be considered in the planning. Implementing integrated solutions at scale include planning land and water resources as a crucial first step, packaging workable solutions, avoiding and reversing land degradation. Next slide, please. Technical and managerial innovation can be targeted to address priorities and accelerate transformation. Caring for neglected soils, addressing drought, and coping with water scarcity can be addressed through the adoption of new technologies and management approaches. Management options are available to increase productivity and production levels if innovation in management and technology can be taken to scale. Next, please. Agricultural support and investment can be redirected towards social and environmental gains derived from land and water management. There is now scope for progressive multi-phased financing of agricultural projects that can be linked with redirected subsidies to keep land and water systems in place. Investments in integrated interventions at scale shows great promise and can be supported through innovative financing and incentive mechanisms. Next, please. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, and this is one of the main findings of SOLAR. A full package of workable solutions is now available to enhance food production and tackle the main threats from land degradation, increasing water scarcity, and declining water quality. But these will succeed only when there is a conducive, enabling environment, strong political will, sound policies and inclusive governance, and full participatory planning processes across all sectors and landscapes. Next, please. And finally, as a main message, that over 95% of food is produced on land and begins with soil and water. And this is very much related to the SDGs. So we need to work together to produce more with less and safeguard these resources for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for giving us ideas as to what can or should be done in regards to improving food supply, in that sense also food security for the people living on this planet Earth. You mentioned, for instance, about the planning, the need for planning. That also was confirmed or was also said through the survey where we asked participants what do they suggest are key issues and challenges. So you're in a way confirming what different people said. The question now is how to improve planning, which I think you also probably agree it's interministerial, how to get the ministries to work together in a meaningful manner to improve food security.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. And the main message here is to work in an integrated and multi-sectoral approach, looking at the landscape. Will the landscape include elements for production, elements for the environment, and elements for the sustainability, as well as the people who are affected and are affecting the system. So our main idea, and that is not new, but how to implement this across sectors and ministries who are involved in the process of sustainability of land and water resources, and how to bring all the sectors to realize this. One of the things that is very important is to introduce a participatory negotiation process across the sectors, so they come for a planning that will, in one hand, satisfy the demands and needs of the different sectors and stakeholders, and in the other hand, being sustainable and provide a good compromise between different sectors and needs. And also looking at the land, soil, and water resources in continuity with the environment and the other sectors that are involved in any planning process. It's not direct, it's not straightforward, but it is necessary. So to bring the sectors at different levels, at national, subnational, and local level. And we started some of this work in different countries to bring various sectors to negotiate in a transparent and integrated manner based on the information available on these resources to negotiate and reach a pact or agreement on how to use the resources in a sustainable manner. I hope I managed to answer this difficult question, because it's
I'm sorry for putting a difficult question to you, but thank you very much for the answer. And it's just, of course, my immediate response will be to say, it's clear negotiation is of paramount importance to get the different ministries and sectors to work together. And there is inevitably going to be a policy trade-off. We cannot do everything at the same time. So what would you suggest would be, maybe in that sense, priority? What needs to be done right now, first of all?
Yes, identifying, as you just mentioned, the priorities, which is different at different countries. At national level, what are the priority? Of course, food production for FAO and in general, food production and security is a main priority. The environment, energy. So these are the sort of priorities that need to be identified at national level. And then the second step will be how to build the compromise between the different elements of these priorities through the planning process and also the implementation and monitoring of the planning process. The SOLAR is providing sometimes the database and information that is necessary, but the process needs to be activated by the national institutions in order to bring these priorities and the compromise and trade-offs between different sectors into the implementation, and then continuous monitoring to see how this should be adjusted to respond to the emerging and the future changes and emergencies and situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it leads, what you said leads very well into the next presentation by Madam Neelkamal Darbari, who I welcome. Glad to see you. I just see that you've been very much active also with the government. I think at the moment you're the Indian Administrative Service. You're the officer, Managing Director of Small Farmers Agribusiness Consortium. It's a full set of words to describe also the work in the Indian government, the Department of Agriculture, Cooperation and Farmers Welfare, which I'm very curious to know and to hear more about what this entails. You are at the secretary level, an officer in the government of India, posted to New Delhi. You're making leading efforts in terms of towards expansion of ENAM and aggregation and economic inclusion of small and marginal farmers in agribusiness activities. And I'm very curious to know more about, to the promotion also of 10,000 farmer producer organizations. Earlier, you were also additional chief secretary in agriculture and horticulture in Rajasthan, and you've been responsible for formulating outcomes based on policy frameworks and promoting sustainable agricultural practices. Now, India being India, meaning I think India has now surpassed China in terms of world population. You have, if I'm not mistaken, 1.2 or 1.3 billion people to feed, and how to go about taking care of this enormous task and responsibility. I think it leads nicely to you, after hearing previously Feras Ziadat speaking about the need for negotiation and government cooperation of the different sectors, that are responsible and important for food security. I'm very curious to listen to you and hear what you have been able to do and what are the challenges for India in regards to SDG 15. Madame Darbari, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your words of introduction. I have listened to the previous speaker, Feras, Ziadat, with great curiosity. And it seems that the agency that I am currently heading is an implementing agency for all kinds of objectives that can be defined as challenges in the field of agriculture, particularly, and agribusiness, secondly. I was wondering if my presentation is here for display. I have sent across a presentation. If it's not there, it's okay. I'm fine with it.
I was not able to receive the slides.
You have not received? I had sent. Okay, never mind. I will speak from whatever I have in my mind. So actually, let me just start with a word of introduction for my organization. This is SFAC, Government of India, Ministry of Agriculture. Actually, from the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Cooperatives has now been separated, and there's a full-fledged Ministry of Cooperatives. And that's now different. But so my ministry continues to be Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, and Small Farmers Agribusiness Consortium is an agency promoted by the Ministry of Agriculture, perhaps a most unique organization in Asia, if not the world, which is committed towards the issues that rise before the small and marginal farmers and how to integrate them up the value chain and make agriculture more remunerative for them. You see, the history of agriculture in India is such that there was initially very large land holdings, but because the population has grown and the laws of inheritance are such that by and by size of land holdings have come down. Government was also committed as part of our freedom struggle to give land to the landless and to take away large chunks of land from the big, what we used to call jagirdars or zamindars, or who were the big land owners, and distribute it equitably to people who didn't have land and who were just tilling land on behalf of somebody. So with that kind of a policy initiative and commitment to nation building, there has been a little bit of fragmentation of land because of the laws of inheritance. So now, so much so that the size of land holdings in India is on an average, I would say 85% of the farmers would be classified as small and marginal farmers. And that is a big challenge because when you have large farms, it is very, very simple to bring in a lot of the technological innovations and measures which would be adopted by the people, by the farming communities. But when you have small size of land holdings, which is about 1.5 acres or 2 acres, 1.5 hectares to 2 hectares average, then that makes the task very, very difficult. It has now also been seen that the size of land holding continues to reduce, continues to diminish. And farming is becoming increasingly non-remunerative and impossible to come up with technological solutions to make farming more remunerative. With that in mind, and also the realization that 60% of India's population is still dependent on agriculture, and 85% of that are small and marginal farmers, contributing less than 15% or thereabouts to the GDP of the country. In some states that are federating the Indian Union, there may be a little higher percentage contribution to the state GDP, but on an average to the nation, the national GDP, the contribution of the farm sector is around 15%. And that's a huge anomaly, with 60% population dependent on agriculture and their contribution to GDP being less than 15% or less than 20%. There certainly is something that needs to be corrected. You mentioned about India being higher in population to Canada. I think still we are at number 2, but It's amazing how we have been with that kind of population and that kind of agricultural structural anomalies. We still have food security in our country, and we are food sufficient nation in the last several years. Having said that, the challenges that arise before this agriculture community, in view of, the world has taken to agriculture through technological measures, and they have been able to improve their productivity and production and overall reduce their dependence on natural resources and reduce their carbon footprints. India is also heading in the same direction. There is much greater dependence on, or rather tilt towards water use efficiency and adopting to precision irrigation rather than going for flood irrigation, choosing crops that are less water consuming than those that are guzzlers of water and scarce resource that water is for a population of 1.3 billion. Yet I would say agriculture consumes about 80% of all the water that is available. So there is a huge scope to reduce the way water is utilized in the agriculture sector, and the country as a whole and different ministries that manage the entire value chain of agriculture, whether it is the Department of Water Resources in the country or in the state governments, or it is the Ministry of Agriculture, or it is the Ministry of Environment, or it is implementing agencies like mine, we have a common objective, which is to reduce the usage of water per hectare and per unit of food produced in the country. And with that realization, and the realization that technology has made very little inroads into the way agriculture is done, we found that there is a case to aggregate the farmers. Considering that the size of land holding is small, there are many more small farmers than large farmers. How do you bring value in the operations of the small farmers? And therefore, this concept of farmer-producer companies have emerged. It has emerged in the last about 7-8 years. There has been a great emphasis on aggregating small farmers and creating synergies between them and for them, so that they are better able to utilize resources, natural resources and other resources, and reduce their cost of production, thereby also reduce the carbon footprint that they leave behind. And then in terms of profitability, to improve their lot so that there is a lesser burden on the population for agriculture. Improve manufacturing environment in the country. And there are a slew of measures that have been taken to introduce diversification for agriculture, from the traditional crops that are grown in India to floriculture, to horticulture, to high value crops, and how to integrate all of that for the betterment of farmers. So then the concept of the farmer-producer company emerged. Of course, there had been aggregation of farmers through the cooperatives route. That is, you have a cooperative system where farmers get together and they elect their representatives and they run their business. But there was some problem that was envisaged over the years with that model of development, which was more democratic and more political than really business organization. So it was felt in the year 2013, I think, that aggregation is important, but not necessarily through the cooperative route. Maybe through the company route, if we did it and gave them greater business interventions, the farming communities would be able to address the issues that face them, the community, the society, and the country, and the planet Earth on the whole. And therefore, the concept of farmer-producer companies emerged. And in this, Government of India has identified how and what are the problems that they wish to address. First of all, what is the problem that a small farmer faces? We keep talking about the need for aggregation, but first, it would be important to identify the problems that they face. And the first problem I could identify was lack of access to credit. They do get some access through the banking system, but a large part of their activities or their business cycle is conducted without institutional credit being available to them. And therefore, 14% of the marginal and 27% of small holdings are able to get credit via institutional sources. And of course, that number is much higher for the larger farmers, but by and large, the farming communities don't have access to institutional finance, and they are forced to depend upon non-institutional sources of financing. And therefore, there's also a higher level of indebtedness amongst the farming community. So that's problem number one, that lack of access to credit or low access to credit. Then also access to markets and information. There's a huge lot of information asymmetry which plagues the farming communities. And the smaller the farmer you are, it's likely that you're situated in an area which is remote, and therefore your access to information may also be remote. Of course, with the proliferation of the mobile telephony and, with smart telephones having really covered about 1 billion of India's population, that has been reduced to a great extent. But also remembering that we have very low levels of formal education and skill development, access may not alone be important enough, and therefore there has to be greater emphasis on direct education as well as skilling and capacity building of farming communities. And small farmers versus large farmers, the information asymmetry is the differentiation is very huge. And therefore also there is greater vulnerability to risks. And therefore, what is it that the government can do, or what is it that the society can do to mitigate the risk factors that are faced by the farmers? Then there are, of course, the whole issue of diversification. What is it that can be done in terms of livestock or poultry, or it is meats and vegetables and fruits? And therefore the concept of protected cultivation comes in, that if you need to optimize output from the land, then what is it that needs to be done to make not only the farming communities stronger and more in a position to bargain, and also be able to contribute optimally to the society, to the country's food security, while being able to manage the environmental balance or ecological balance, and thereby the sustainable development goals. So with that, the farmer producer companies emerged. And what is it that they do now? So there was an amendment to the Indian Companies Act which allowed for farming producer companies to be registered as a Section 9 company. And what is it that a company can do which a farmer cannot do? So if you look at the bargaining power of the group of farmers vis-a-vis that of an individual farmer, you understand that there is unity in strength. And if you have a strong body of members of a company, they have numbers, they have volume to bargain with. So you can bargain for seeds, you can bargain for credit, you can bargain for transportation, you can bargain for marketing, you can bargain for all kinds of inputs, whether it is in terms of fertilizers or pesticides, or even soil related issues like carbonization, etc. And above all, access to institutional credit and modern systems of marketing. And this is what SFAC is attempting to do. We have, in my introduction, you had mentioned about ENAM, and let me also explain to you what ENAM does. ENAM is Electronic National Market for Agriculture. It is open to all farmers and FPOs. At the moment, we have 1,000 marketing yards, which we call APMCs, that are integrated to the ENAM platform, and it brings in the buyers and sellers, allows for competitive bidding so that the farmers are able to get fair remuneration for their prices. And also the FPOs can sell their produce through the ENAM platform. So essentially trying to bring in technology so that the farmers stand to benefit. And the farmer producer organization is the best place to invest for technology. Simply speaking, it's not remunerative for farmers to, for example, to bring in higher levels of mechanization, because it's expensive and you block capital, and you're already facing a situation of low capital formation in agriculture. And if that is allowed to go unchecked, then there is a problem with higher utilization of capital that is available. So for that, FPO is the best means. So you can aggregate and you can have access to mechanized means of farming. And thereby, let me give an example. So while when a farmer starts earning a little better, the first thing he wants to do is buy a tractor and some equipment to go with the tractor. Now, if every 2 hectares you have a tractor owner, so think in terms of the capital being blocked, because ultimately you are using that tractor only for a few days in a year. So one is the capital block, then the 2 is the non-sustainability of that whole thing. Whereas in a group of 300 farmers, if you buy a couple of tractors and other implements, you are optimally utilizing that. So that's the idea. Similarly, you can bargain with the seed producers, you can bargain. So all kinds of leverages that are available to an aggregation of farmers, that is what SFAC is attempting to do through FPOs. And government has realized the value of that, and it has taken an active step and committed that there will be, in the next 5 years, actually 2 years are already behind us, 10,000 farmer producer companies in the country. And it has put together a budget of 6,600 crore rupees to assist the farmers and the FPOs in the promotion of aggregation and in the promotion of access to credit and access to markets, and how to build capacities, how to bring in technology, how to bring in innovative solutions, how to bring in water use efficiency, how to bring in protected cultivation, and reduce post-harvest wastage. So for all of this, technology is required, and therefore, if you produce X quantity in a year, that X quantity should land on some people's tables, whereas it is X minus 30% at the moment. So that 35% wastage, which goes, in the form of a post-harvest wastage, that is also to be controlled through the FPO route, because greater emphasis on sorting, grading, polishing, and packaging and marketing will ensure that there is greater availability of food on the table at the end of the day, with lesser load on the environment.
Madam Darbari, sorry for interrupting you. 2 more minutes. We're getting closer.
All right, I'm going to wind up. So government has,
thank you.
So SFAC is playing a pivotal role in that, and we have the program for promotion of 10,000 FPOs with committed budget for 5 years, sorry. And we also have engaged various knowledge partners to assist us in this, and it is covering the entire range of activities, from inputs to marketing, whether it is in terms of production, harvesting, or processing, or quality testing, or storage, transportation, warehousing, and whatever you name it. Therefore, there is hope that with the emphasis that the government has placed on the formation and promotion of FPOs as a vehicle to sustainable agricultural development, that policy is well in place. It is supported by convergence of different ministries, whether it is the Ministry of Food Processing, or it is the Ministry of Cooperation, or it is Ministry of Animal Husbandry, it is Ministry of Finance in a very big way, and of course implementing agencies like mine, SFAC, where I'm MD of. So I look at it as a great, it will be making these changes available to 300,000 farmers minimum. 300 is the size of one aggregate, and 300,000 farmers will join in minimum, going up to 100,000, a million, going up to a million as the size of the company increases. So with that, I would like to say that there are other schemes also, like mega food parks, which would again, reduce the cost of services. Then cold chain, integrated cold chain and value addition infrastructure. There is a whole fund which has been created for improving the agriculture infrastructure in the country. And with that, I would say that the missing pieces and the jigsaw puzzle seems to have been completed. And I think we are on the road to creating more sustainability in the agriculture operations of the country. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And I hope in the short time available, I've been able to tell what the country is doing in terms of addressing the sustainable development goals through the means of farmer producer organizations, and in the manner of aggregating farmers and reducing their cost of production. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just enormous, the amount of new policies, the new approaches to solve an issue which I have over many years now visiting in India and listening to agricultural policy and reforms. It's just incredible how much, in that sense, innovativeness I hear from your presentation of looking for new solutions to, in a way you could say, an old problem. As you said, there are the land, the scale issue, there could say there are too many farmers in very limited on very limited land, and how to aggregate, how in that sense, how to move, you didn't say it, but I was just wondering, what is the linked social policy strategy of the Indian government once you have, let's say, successful former producer companies? At a certain stage, it gets to the aggregation, and some of the farmers either give up their land, or they become part of the company, or they move to another place. I remember listening to a book presentation in Delhi, where there was talk about moving millions of Indian farmers to the city. Where I don't know whether that's still a policy that is being discussed, but let's say if the solutions you shared with us leads to also rethinking where the farmers should be or could be, or where can they survive, if in case some of them have to move on to maybe new cities or urban cities, what are the policies, or how does the Indian government think about, you know, consultation with civil society, with the farmers, how to come up with a solution that will be sustainable and acceptable to the farmers who at the moment are just trying to survive? And a linked question to that is, you mentioned that cooperative solution didn't work. I'm curious to know, why didn't it work?
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting questions. I wish I had all the answers, but I will attempt to address the concerns. So I think every society has an aspirational, slant to it. And since large number of Indians live in rural India, and rural India really is very different from what others might understand as rural, it is still underdeveloped. It is still, I would say, there's a lot of infrastructure development which has taken place, but there's a lot of social infrastructure which is still coming up. So people and industries are coming up in the city or suburban areas. So there is going to be a very, very aspirational chunk of the society which would want to live better lives, and therefore better lives is identified with urban, and therefore the city, that is how it is looked at in India. However, so far as government policy is concerned, I would say while the government stands committed to improving the urban infrastructure to accommodate the natural growth in the urban population, yet there are conscious policy initiatives on how to improve the life of the rural population, whether it is in terms of creating a guaranteed employment generation scheme which caters to the rural population, or it is in terms of improving the social infrastructure in the villages, or it is in terms of modernizing agriculture and animal husbandry. There are conscious policy with budgetary supports that are available to keep the people in the rural areas that want to live there. At the same time, children who have acquired education, higher education, and want a better, again, I'm saying better in quote unquote, a different life from what their forefathers have lived in the rural areas. The country is geared towards improving the urban infrastructure as well. And therefore, there's a lot of work which is going on in terms of creation of urban infrastructure, whether it is through highways, connectivity, or bridges, or roads, or others. But really, the emphasis equally on rural development and as well as on urban infrastructure. And nobody has to give up their land. You know, you mentioned about farmer producer companies that are required to, no, they do not require to give up their lands. What is coming together is, I think it's more a coming together of minds that, okay, we retain our ownership, we retain the right to cultivate our land, but what is it that we can do together? Can we reduce the cost of the seeds and other inputs? Can we join forces to warehouse our product? Can we join forces to market our produce and therefore reduce the cost, because you are having a joint operation? So nobody has to give up any land. They retain the ownership of their land. Cooperatives, I wouldn't say didn't work. It worked well in certain pockets of the country, in certain segments of the economy. For example, we have the largest milk union cooperative, which is Anand in Amul, which makes the country's most delectable butter and other milk products. So it worked very well in Gujarat. It has worked very well in sugarcane in Maharashtra and so on and so forth. But when it comes to agribusiness, for example, or creation of business opportunities for agriculture. Somewhere we felt that it wasn't working the way. And the reason for that was, I think, the little bit of politicization in the cooperative sector that took place, because it is an elected body after all. And, with elections comes in a lot of other things. So it was not professionally managed as opposed to how a company can be managed. So I think that's where the answer would lie, that you bring in business practices rather than political, ambition or political direction. So with that, I think Companies Act is, of course, I'm not saying that with the registration of aggregates under Companies Act, all problems will go away. New set of problems will be thrown up. But as the situation lies before us today, this thing about FPOs has caught the fancy of the public. I go into remote areas of the country and I see people beyond the 10,000 target of the government. They are setting up FPCs on their own, the producer companies on their own, and they are beginning to do better marketing than they were able to do individually, is what my answer is.
Well, thank you very much for the answers that you gave me and to us and shared with us. I can imagine there's going to be a lot. It's like a laboratory almost. There are a lot of new ideas and a lot of negotiations which probably have to happen within the government, as well as consultations with civil society. And how this will be done, of course, that will be another special webinar to listen to you. I wish you, of course, a lot of luck and look forward to staying in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to being connected again. Thank you so much, Raymond.
Thank you. This leads us to the next speaker, Jan-Gustav Strandenaes. And there he is. Jan-Gustav has been around not just in terms of age, but around in terms of experience. And I know, I have to reveal this, I know Jan-Gustav for a few years, and I'm amazed of all the wonderful work he's been doing to bring on board what in a way was just left when I said goodbye before to the previous speaker about the consultation with civil society, how to talk to each other and how to look for solutions that are acceptable, are inclusive and sustainable. Jan-Gustav has been working for the UN on environmental and governance issues since 1970s. He was a first UN assignment brought him to Latin America, and he also taught about the UN for more than 5 decades, and he continues to teach, do webinars, explain to people how the different UN agencies work, the structure of UN agencies, and how could also civil society contribute and participate. For 15 years or more, he worked as NGO liaison officer at the UN headquarters in New York and worked as diplomat for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway. He was with Norwegian embassies in Botswana and Uganda, and also had 15 years of experience as director of the Aid and Environment NGO, which had projects in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. What I follow closely, and I'm looking forward to listening to you again, Jan-Gustav, is your ability to explain the UN system and to also invite participation and contribution from civil societies, as well as, of course, also from business and from different governments, but to look at the UN system from a larger, broader perspective, where the so-called multi-stakeholder approach, where different stakeholders can participate, contribute, and make basically the world a better place in the sense of being better, being more inclusive and participatory. You have done great work in this field, and I look forward to listening to you. Welcome to you. You have the floor, Jan-Gustav.
Very much, Raymond. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I am going to share content, and I need to do my own shifting of the slides, and I hope I can get some technical help if I am showing that I have 11 thumbs and not 10. Let's see if I can do this. I'm getting this, I hope. Now, and I am getting it. Can you now see this, Raymond?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I think this is the beginning. And did it change for you? And I changed this as well. You can see the change?
Yeah, let me see it.
Okay, then I shall now start and try to be within my 15 minutes. I thank you very much for your very kind introduction, and also thank to the two speakers ahead of me who really outlined some of the challenges around SDG 15, or all the SDGs, in fact. And I've been asked to talk about a focus on partnerships within the SDG 15, and I will do so. My background also was as a negotiator in developing the SDGs with civil society, and I feel very much and feel strongly about these SDGs. So I need to just for a second say, remember our world, the world we're in. And then that didn't work. Why didn't it work? It's now stopped. I should be sharing. Oh, so there it comes. Okay, so we got the IPBES report a few years ago on the biodiversity, and it says dramatically that if we don't change our ways, we may face the extinction of 1 million species or more. We are daily reminded of the climate change issues, that global warming is still happening, despite the fact that we both had the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Agreement. And UNEP today speaks of 3 integrated crises. They talk about the loss of biodiversity, and they think and hope that nature-based solutions and the Archie goals can be a remedy for this. Archie goals were supposed to, as we mentioned earlier, to be finalized by 2020, 2 years ago. They talk about climate change and turn to non-fossil fuel energy and economy as a necessity. And they talk about the chemical and other type of dangerous pollution, the 3 integrated crises here. Well, we know that the planet is sick and it needs help. And in 2015, we got the help we needed for the time being, the 17 SDGs and the 2030 agenda. I want everybody to remember the basics of this, because we so quickly forget what are the basic documents. First of all, we have the knowledge now. After 50 years of work, we know this. We have the tools to implement solutions. We have the money, absolutely. We have the answers. The question is, are we willing to do what we need to do? And that's a basic document that we are now basing all this discussion on, is the transforming of the world into an agenda for sustainable development. It carries the non-sexy reference, ARES 70.1. The 17 SDGs are part of this document. There are 169 targets, 230 plus indicators. And just also please remember that there are 4 chapters or 4 divisions to this phenomenal document. It's got a preamble and a declaration, which we need to try to fulfill. It got the 17 SDGs. It has a very interesting and challenging chapter on means of implementation and global partnership, and then finally follow up and review. And this is where we are also today. In addition to that, what is very often forgotten, because I see this at conferences and when I talk to delegates and civil society, what we have done, and I've listed a number of key decisions made to expand the 2030 Sustainable Development Portfolio, that's on the left side, and what is going to be happening in the next few years up to 2030 in expanding our understanding and knowledge of what we're talking about. We have on the left side the 17 SDGs, the 232 review indicators, the resolution which established HLPF. We have the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on finance, the Paris Climate Agreement, and then we have now the Glasgow Agreement on climate, the Sendai Outcome Document on disaster reduction, which will be discussed in Bali in June this year, the Samoa Pathway and the SIDS Agreement, and continual upgrades by UN entities. And to come, the next few years, the World Data Forum, which will be discussing the need to upgrade data. annual HLPFs, the reviews on a national, global, and regional level, the SDG high-level meeting in 23 and 27. Will 2027 be a quick-off process to replace the SDGs? We've got the annual financing for development forums, the UNEP annual reports on the state of the environment, the UN Environment Assemblies, Global Sustainable Development Report, which I will talk a little bit about, and we have continued ECOSOC deliberation on the SDGs. I mention this because it continually expands our knowledge and understanding of sustainable development, and it's very often forgotten. If I use too much time on this, it sort of freezes. There we go. What do we understand? Well, the GSDR is a very interesting document. We get it, and then we sort of forget it, but it shouldn't be forgotten. The Global Sustainable Development Report published in 2019 talked about we need to improve our human well-being or face enormous costs of not doing that. They point to the interconnections. They point to actions in one country that might leave negative footprints across the world. The transboundary issues, which was first time developed and discussed in 1972 in UNEP's founding conference there. We've got the SDGR talking about maximizing immediate returns or looking at the long-term consequences. Be aware of what we do. They talk about holistically integrating the SDGs, and they talk about the complex causal changes and the linkages across goals and targets. All these are elements that we need to keep in our mind when we make a national strategy. Then I looked at the influence that the different players have. And of course, you can look at the governments on all different levels, local, national, or regional level. They have a high possibility of influencing. So does business, but not so civil society and NGOs. And you may ask, why is this lessening in regional and global area? Simply because they are not allowed to be part of that process. They push and they want to be part of the international processes in decision-making development, but they're often squeezed out, and the windows of opportunity for civil society is actually closing. The interest, again, we see there is a different picture here if you look at what's happening from 2015 up until today. Government interest, it's not constant, and I would say it varies from some with a high motivation to governments not so interested. Business, on the other hand, is growing in interest in implementing the 2030 agenda. Civil society, again, an uneven picture, and the less they're involved, the less they have been allowed to do so, which is unfortunate. If you look at this very rudimentary chart and say, look at the ability to implement, again, we see governments are, of course, on the high level, business as well, civil society and NGOs, it varies. And again, because they are not involved. Preparedness, that's an interesting look, because if you base your preparedness issue on the VNRs, there is a lot of different approaches. And I would say governments range from a few on a local level to very few, again, on the global level. Business, uneven when it comes to being prepared to deal with this, but it's growing in positiveness. I would say when it comes to civil society and NGOs and partnerships, they want to be on a local and national level. Their participation and preparedness is growing. But when it comes to the regional and sort of the global level, they're not there yet. So sustainable development is actually not prioritized. And this is an interesting thing because we're in the middle of a discussion where we think this is. First of all, we know that the VNRs reflect involvement of a lot of players. And by the summer of 2022, between 250 and 300 VNRs will have been delivered. So people and governments take it seriously. Now, but look at this. When I have looked at the preparedness of governments in preparing for the VNRs, there are three distinct different levels. First of all, we see the governments who have said, we want to prepare today, and they just on an ad hoc basis establish a body within the government to prepare. And you can see the substance of these reports, which is basically based on a year and a half profile. The substance is not very high. Then you go to countries which has developed a holistic national strategy, but have a very erratic involvement of civil society, but they have a continuation in their preparedness and work. Their VNRs carry a lot more substance. And then you have the countries that has a holistic national strategy for sustainable development and a functional multi-stakeholder consultation process. That's where you have high substance in the VNRs. And then if you look at what the annual reports from the UN World Public Services reports right, is interesting. There's still a tendency to develop strategies along traditional development thinking, which leads to one of two things. One, efforts are made to adapt development thinking to sustainable development, and you see the automatic ticking of boxes. And then you have the other one, countries develop two strategies, one based on traditional development thinking and one on sustainability. And the report from the UN says in both cases, sustainable development is given the lower priority. Now, has anyone adopted the 2030 agenda wholeheartedly? And unfortunately, to my colleagues around the world, I am a European. I speak to you from Oslo, Norway, and I will take my examples to illustrate this from Europe, which I know best. First of all, Germany has integrated the entire spectrum of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda into its national plans. And they have done so by integrating it into every ministry. And they are quite successful in doing so, I would say. For instance, they are reversing the trend on biodiversity loss. They're phasing out fossil fuel. They are going into more circular consumption and production patterns. And they are leading an informed debate on all these dimensions of sustainable development. This bodes for a good partnership possibility as well. And then my country, we have 4 centers of sustainable focus. And of course, my place is in Oslo, which you find to the right here. And I worked with a municipality outside of Oslo, and we trained their politicians, their elected politicians, and all the staff for actually 2 weeks. Then they developed their own municipal plan based on the SDGs. They developed tools to do this, and they said at the basis of our municipal plan, we will have the SDGs, they will constitute a whole, but developing municipality needs to prioritize. Then we did a materiality assessment on the structure and the business ideas of the municipality, and they came up with an integrated SDG tool, which they took to say to be the target and the goal and the implementational tool for their own community. Anchored in the SDG 2030 agenda at the top level. This was nothing to do with an intern, but it was anchored at the administrative top level, and the mayor established a consortium of experts around herself. It was a woman doing this. And because they had a very strong outreach to everybody from kindergarten and all through the school system and the NGOs and the communities, they were able to involve the entire constituency and build partnerships. And they're quite successful in transforming this municipality into an SDG municipality. Governance and partnerships are playing an incredibly important role in all of this. And just look at these adages. We know that unless governments own intergovernmental processes like the SDGs, policies will never be taken seriously. On the other hand, unless people feel ownership with development, little, if anything, will be implemented. People are amazing at demonstrating their bad will. We know that. Implementation is based on partnership between governments, the private sector, and the people. And here we come into a dilemma, because unless business can make a profit, they will not engage. So this is an element that needs to be addressed as well in terms of transforming our societies to sustainable societies. And then finally, are the interests of stakeholders and challenges of governance compatible, and are they conducive to implementing the 2030 agenda? It's a hugely important question to ask. And I've listed a number of issues that are directly pertaining to how we integrate and understand governance. Whose interest do issues reflect? Who developed indicators? Are the values of the indicators based on what people perceive as important, collective goods, collective interest of society, etc.? These questions are extremely important to ask by governments, by local and national authorities every time they put together a strategy on the SDGs. This is just a picture that is a famous UN DESA picture on how everything is interrelated. I like it. It's confusing, but it makes sense. Now, let's look at this life on land, the 15. It says, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt the biodiversity loss. It's a huge and tall order, and it's important, absolutely, to fulfill this. In general, you could say it's about strengthening all environmental issues, from conservation to restoration through nature-based solutions. The SDG 15 has 12 targets and 26 indicators to deal with. SDG 17, which we'll deal slowly with, has 19 targets and 44 indicators. And SDG 17 is also about partnerships, technology, trade capacity building, and systemic issues. Professor Rockström has been dealing with this. He's the director of the Potsdam Institute today. He organized the SDGs this way. 70s is on top, and the biosphere is at the bottom. And he said, it's non-negotiable. Without nature, there is absolutely nothing for us to do. So tools and concepts are available for all stakeholders, and the SDGs can guide us in this. This is just an overview of a fascinating report that I would encourage people to look at. It's developed by the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Vienna, and it's called The World in 2050, Key Transformational Elements. But if we take transformational elements, and I'm just coming to my conclusion now, to say we need a new conceptual thinking, a new institutional architecture, strong and active governance, and a new economic systemic thinking. This is also what SDG 17 is about, systemic thinking. And I think that effective and relevant governance must reflect the following 9-dimensional thinking. And these 9 elements are all taken from the 2030 Agenda. First, the 2030 Agenda says that all the SDGs must be integrated, interlinked, and indivisible. Second, they must be universal, people-centered, and planet-sensitive. And then the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, social, economic, and environment. And if you put these all together, you get transformative sustainable development, which is the change we need. And that is also applied now by the EU. They say, you want to focus on a few ones, like we do in this VNR. Well, that's fine. But then it says in the taxonomy on the financial and social issues, do no harm to the others, which means we need to keep all 17 in our head when we plan our things. So in conclusion, my friends, doing more with less, which is often said, or business as usual, they're not truism. They are attitudes and approaches of disaster. We are faced with the biggest challenge in humanity's existing, saving the globe. We cannot afford not to give our ideas adequate resources. We will never be able to calculate the cost of not doing enough. The cost will be astronomical or incalculable. And will we take the responsibility for such a disaster, or will we just leave the problems for our next generation, the youth of today, and leave everybody behind? I don't think we will do that. We've changed a lot in a very short period of time. And as a historian, I can say we've come a long way in a short period of time. But as an environmentalist, I would say we've not come far enough. So let's move forward. And just leave you with this. I am an optimist. And I think optimism is the fuel of heroes, the enemy of despair, and the creator of future. And that's what we want to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan-Gustav. It's such an uplifting closure in light of all the current problems that we have to face. Why not be optimistic as you suggest? And I'm just wondering if there is maybe a stepping stone that you could elaborate on, particularly regarding SDG 15, since that's the topic of today, or the combination of 15 with 17, how to begin with to do what you have so eloquently shared with us about, seeing the whole thing, seeing how everything is interconnected, and to look at ways to move forward. Where could we start?
Well, thank you. I mean, you have an ability, Raymond, to pose the most difficult questions and expect me to answer in a very few seconds. I would say one thing which I have seen of late, and also because I'm working with Stockholm Plus 50, which in June hopefully will be a manifestation of the UN Environment Programme's work on the environment. I have seen that we are probably making trying to say that sustainable development, environmental issues, biodiversity and climate are synonymous. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. We say, think out of the silos. Yes, but we need to keep expertise in hand. We need to understand the differences between these concepts as well as see the interlinkages. And that's what I was trying to do. So adhering to the expertise of the environmental issues as well as agricultural issues as well as social issues is extremely important. So for instance, UNEP wanted to have the overarching title for the last UN Environment Assembly this year in March as nature-based solutions. Governments opposed that and said it's too difficult. I don't think it is too difficult to take nature-based solutions into what we're talking about. We heard that in the first overview from FAO. We heard it from India that farmers do live close to nature and they understand the implications of this. So taking environmental issues as a focus with sustainable development as a focus and with the other elements such as biodiversity as a focus and then integrating them, I think it's a very important step. And then you need to involve civil society in all this. They want to be participating and they are actually, unfortunately, now being barred from doing so in so many countries. It is a very difficult question, but if we don't do anything, nothing will happen.
Yeah, sure, clear.
And Heimo, my example, if I may add that, I lecture at students, and they asked me today, can you give us an example of things are improving? And I say one thing. 1962, Rachel Carson produced a book that is said to have started the environmental movement. It was called Silent Spring. She was alone in doing that. Today, there are millions of us wanting what she wanted to do in 1962. And so that just by sheer magnitude, people everywhere are engaged, and that's positive.
Thanks, Jan-Gustav. You make me also remember one issue I had doing academic work is the question how to work in an interdisciplinary manner. Because you're right to emphasize we should not only look at the interconnectedness, the horizontal perspective, but also stay in tune with the vertical specificities of the different goals or sectors. But that's quite a formidable task to be vertically, let's say, competent to understand 15, 4, 6, without being superficial, and still see the connectedness. So mentally speaking, it's an issue, but also just from an academic perspective, for instance, you have to know the field of these other specialists who deal with land or ocean, and they have their own reference system and their own world, so to speak. How to be both vertically and horizontally competent or competent enough and open-minded enough to include the other fields. What's your suggestion to students here?
Well, I say that if you are enthusiastic, and this has been proven, if you're enthusiastic, you're more credible. And enthusiasm comes with hope and optimism. So that's an attitudinal process. I think the flexibility of the human mind is incredible. And I think that back in 1987, when Brundtland produced the so-called sustainable dimensions of the three issues, we suddenly had three things in our head to think about in addition to being experts in the different fields. Now the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda, has produced 9 such issues, 6+. And I think we can keep that in mind when we think and plan. And I think the governments at different levels are actually in a fantastic position to do so, because they can call in the ministries from all sectors and sit together. Angela Merkel, the former Prime Minister of Germany, she actually said, every 2 months, we will have all the ministries dealing with the SDGs involved in a one-day conference and exchange ideas and exchange experiences. So by putting together the experts from the all different ministries, line ministries, you can actually put these dimensions together. And I think that type of coordination is extremely important. You see it within the UN system when they do this in the EMG, the body that tries to connect the different environmental elements of the UN under the auspices of UNEP. So, you know, there are institutional ways to do this at the same time being with our resilient minds.
Thank you very much, Jan-Gustav. Thanks. Well, we'll move on and to our next presenter, who is Claude Heimo. And Claude will, in addition to talking to us about SDG 15, will also draw on his experience of a larger country called China and how the complexity of China, what to do in regards to SDG 15 implementation. But briefly, let me say a few words about Claude. Claude is a Swiss national and has been working on nature-based issues and particularly agriculture and forestry for quite some time. At the beginning of his career, between 1982 and 1998, he was the senior forestry officer at the FAO. So we have a connection to our first speaker. And later on, he was the senior forestry specialist of the World Bank and its GF program. He was very much active in different countries regarding forestry, agriculture, agroforestry, biodiversity, and environmental conservation issues that he was addressing in different countries from Asia to Latin America to the Middle East. Now, he will also say some things about, as I mentioned it early, with the project that he was able to successfully complete, and also the production of knowledge in terms of books on how to consult or what to say to China, which also has, like India, has to feed its 1.200 million people, and how to ensure food security while at the same time not falling into the trap to use efficiency methods which are harmful for the environment, but how to create sustainable forestry and agriculture without, I'd like just to hand it over to you, Claude. There's much more to say to it. Welcome, and please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Raymond, for your kind words. Well, indeed, we know each other for a long time, and you follow my career along many different institutions, and in particular FAO, the World Bank, but also working on satellite information, etc., and finally on biotrade in Vietnam and China. My presentation would be focused on question of China food security issues and solution that we propose. Let me just introduce the research that we have done in a very few words. In September 2018, the State Council of China released the strategy plan for rural revitalization 2018-2022. This strategy stressed that resolving issues relating to agriculture and rural development in Sannong in Chinese are fundamental to China, as they directly concern the stability of the country, its food security, and people's well-being. This is in this context that the research I've made on China food security issues in national core grain growing area was developed. It was financed by the Asian Development Bank, and the research was led by a very good friend of mine, which is called Professor Li Zhu from the excuse me, from the Chinese Academy of Social Science. The result of our research has now been published in China, and it's published in English as well, and in Chinese as well as in English. In fact, after working during these 3 years in China, I think that this publication is not only aimed at all those involved in making and implementing food security policies in China, but also at all their counterparts operating in other developed and developing countries. Next slide, please. So my presentation will be divided into 3 parts. First of all, I will recall a little bit about China food security, how it has evolved over time. Then I will talk about the ecological constraint affecting food security in China, and I will complete my presentation by talking about what we propose to the government. It's the implementing of an ecological security strategy at farm and agriculture landscape level. So nowadays, whatever the effect of the COVID and the war in Ukraine, China, as Raymond was saying, must feed a population of 1.4 billion inhabitants, roughly on 20%, representing 20% of the world population, on 7% of the world arable land, and 1/4 of the world per capita water endowment. Historically, China experienced a lot of numerous food shortage and famines, which were remedied by implementing a quota system in 1953, a land contract reform process in 1981, the household responsibility system in 1982, and in 2008, the creation on 13 core grain growing area. And finally, an eco-civilization strategy starting in 2014, emphasizing green development in line with the Agenda 2030 objective. Nowadays, those 13 core grain growing area have provided the bulk of China's grain production on wheat, corn, rice, potatoes. As such, they are at the core of China food security. Next slide. Next slide, yeah. Due to the success of past successive policies, China has nowadays basically resolved the problem of insufficient grain supply. China has reached now a self-sufficiency in grain of about 95%. In 2017, it is the first time that the total grain production of China reached 617 million tons of grain, surpassing the growth of its population by 34%. However, as you know, China remained the world's largest importer of soybeans, meat, dairy, wine, and other food products and beverage. Yet, during the past period, due to the excessive pursuit of GDP growth and irrational development, China has heavily exploited its natural resource and damaged environmental conditions. This has resulted in a series of serious and critical ecological and environmental issues which may affect its food security, such as soil and water pollution, groundwater scarcity, soil erosion, forest ecosystem degradation, and loss of biodiversity. Next slides, please. First issue affecting food security in core grain growing area of China, NPS pollution. During the past 40 years, the fertilizer application, synthetic fertilizer application, increased 3.7-fold since the founding of the PRC, giving an average application of 427 kilo per hectare, with efficiency averaging 55% compared to about 70–80% in other developing countries. In 2017, 380,000 tons of pesticide have been used in China, given an average application rate of 11.6 kilo per hectare for grain, an application rate which is about 50% higher than in other developed countries. We count 7 to 8 kilograms per hectare. And both the excessive use of chemical fertilizer and pesticide is nowadays the main source of diffuse, what we call non-point source pollution of agricultural soil and water, which is currently affecting about 15% of China arable land. Next slides. Second issue is overconsumption of pesticide. This is just to tell you about, to show you about the rate of pesticide application in the world. And you look at China being one of the major user of pesticides. Next slides. Second issues, declining availability of water for irrigation. Irrigated area in China moved from 15.9 million hectares in 1949 to 67.1 million hectares in 2006, an increase of 52.2 million hectares since the founding of the PRC. Due to the indiscriminate use of groundwater for irrigation, in 5 among the 13 core grain growing area, the decline of groundwater level has become one of the most important environment problems, which is worsening water competition with other sectors, as you may guess. Next slides, please. The third issue affecting food security is the loss of agricultural land. The government estimates that it needs about 120 million hectares of agricultural land to maintain self-sufficiency in grain production in the country. However, according to available statistics, China total arable land declined between 2013 and 2017 by 134 million hectares as a result of urban expansion, industrial development, soil erosion, desertification, natural disaster, and environmental protection, such as reforestation, for example. Furthermore, as many as 10 million hectares are heavily contaminated by heavy metals, mainly cadmium, nickel, and mercury. Next slides. Fourth issues affecting food security in China. The rapid industrial development and MPS, non-point source pollution, have left large parts of groundwater unfit for human use and deemed too polluted for growing crop. As of today, it is estimated that over 95% of China's river and 90% of groundwater are polluted at various degrees. Next slide, please. Finally, climate change is also affecting food security in China. Over the past decade, climate change has led to serious consequences for agricultural production in China. According to the APCC IF5, estimate climate change in China will lead to both negative and positive impact on crop yield. Negative, increasing temperature and evapotranspiration are leading to harvest loss due to runoff, erosion, salinization, increasing risk of traditional and new pests, and more importantly, to an increased occurrence of extreme weather, especially natural disaster, such as heat waves, torrential rain, floods, sandstorm, and drought, already experienced in the 13 core grain growing area. On the positive side, however, increasing temperature associated with increased rainfall may extend the length of growing season, which would provide more opportunity for rain-fed crops. Next slide, please. Finally, the last issues affecting food security is the decreased benefit from farmland protection forest. Beside forest, tree crop intercropping, riparian tree lines, windbreak shelter belts, edges have traditionally played a critical farmland protection role, notably under the form of networks of farmland protection forest, which is called in China foresights, which was established under the commune system. Yet, despite the inherent benefits of this foresights structure, a series of problems, constraints, and barriers have gradually emerged, leading to their degradation and even eradication. Next slides, please. To sum up, climate change, NPS pollution, decreasing water availability and pollution, artificialization of arable land, and environment degradation of foresights will not only have large negative impact on future crop production, but also on the overall resistance of farmland, putting an increased stress on food security. Well, the above issues, and as you know, affecting China food security are not confined to China only, since according to FAO, a quarter of the world arable land is already degraded, a degradation compounded with biodiversity lost. Consequently, adapting agriculture to the above issues will require the government of China, as well as of other governments from developed and developing countries, to adopt new food security strategy that would enhance the ecological security condition of farms and agriculture landscapes. Next slide, please. Our assessment of the major issues facing food security and grain production in the major 13 core grain growing area lead us, Professor Liu and myself, to propose a new ecological security strategy to be implemented by the government. It includes 6 pillars. And the adoption of, first, an agriculture NPS pollution control system. Second, a water resource conservation system. Third, an ecological farming field practice to improve farmland productivity while adapting to climate change. Fourth, an ecological protection system at farm and agriculture landscape level. Fifth, an enabling government system enhancing farm and landscape ecological security. And lastly, measure to advance the knowledge of ecological security requirement and extending the know-how to farmers and policy makers. I will now review in detail each of these 6 pillars for the proposed ecological security strategy. Next slide, please.
Claude, I'm sorry, but you have 2 more minutes left.
Difficult for me.
Yeah.
The first one is the establishment of, well, in that case, if I only get,
Maybe
I don't know.
to focus on the most important one of the messages.
The first one is establishment of the NPS system, issuance of quota for synthetic fertilizer and pesticide, promotion of organic fertilization, improving the use of slow and controlled release fertilizer, use low toxicity eco-friendly pesticide, promoting mechanized pesticide spreading technology, improving mulch film standard to decrease white pollution, and mulch film recovery technology, establishing a biological crop disease and insect pest control. Next slides. Establishment of water resource conservation. I will focus only on one plan, which was new to China, is the issuance of water coupon for the development of water right trading market. It is called in Chinese, 1 well, 1 meter, 1 household, and 1 cart. Next slides, please. Adopting ecological farming system, I think encouraging crop rotation, routinely keeping soil covered with living and crop residues, encouraging the use of organic matter, adopting reduced tillage and so on, improving the use of organic fertilizer. This is new. And next step. Next slide. And adopting an ecological farmland protection system. The advice is to conserve, manage, and expand existing farmland protection system by adopting adequate financial compensation to further enhance farmer participation, revising the management and harvesting prescription related to farmland protection system, and revising existing design to minimize trees' impact on production. What is important to me is to update existing incentive, called in China eco-compensation system, to enhance farmer participation in the management, conservation, expansion of farmland protection forests, and other agroforestry measures. Also create new tree line along infrastructure, ecological corridor, buffer strip, natural habitat, and biodiversity niche. Next slides, please. Building an enabling governance system. It should include 3 types of policies. Compulsory policies like reforming current system of input subsidies, coordination policy, the development of platform for cross-agency policy and institutional coordination, what we call vertical coordination, and with farmers and related organizations, which is called horizontal coordination. And finally, revising the incentive system and transfer payment to farmer to reward farmer adopting proposed ecological security measures. Finally, the 6 pillars, next slides, is raising farmers' awareness while advancing their knowledge on ecological security requirement through increasing the scope and the scale of adaptive research and development program, research and development system, and communicating the know-how at the farmer and the policy level. Next slides, please. In short, the research and the ecological security strategy which is proposing is advocating a farmer center and a knowledge-based integrated ecological security. The strategy should be leading to the development of locally adapted climate resilient agriculture and environmental sound agriculture landscape practice. And to be successful and efficiently support farmers, the strategy should include mainstreaming cross-sector policy, incentive, and technical assistance from extension service and adaptive research and development. Sorry for having been long, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claude. I think you could easily go much longer. The challenges for China is just so tremendous. I'm just taken by all the research that you have been able to do with your colleague, Professor Lichia. The question now comes, in a way, the question I put before to Jan-Gustav. If you look at what you just said, there's a need for vertical and horizontal coordination. You also mentioned to enhance farmers' participation, which in a way would be bottom up, as well as on the other hand, the need for centralized, more top-down decisions, how to get this complexity become reality in a sustainable manner versus pursuing the current business as usual, which is like almost like an eco suicide for China's agriculture, if it is based on all this pesticide and what you just mentioned before. How to shift around, how to change the famous tanker to go into a new direction, how to go about doing more of the bottom-up, top-down, vertical, horizontal coordination.
It is a major challenge for China. If I do remember the work that we did in Henan province, our work on ecological security was hosted by the forestry department. Mm. It took me nearly 1.5 years to get the agriculture department involved in the discussion we had about ecological security. Now, the challenge is that for the time being, at the provincial level, institutions in China are working in silos. They are working independently, but the new things that we propose, Professor Li Zhu, and which has been accepted by the Research Center of the China Council, it's really to work at this strategy, at the ecological security strategy. Oh, by the way, in the eco-civilization system proposed by China since 2014, this question of coordination is highly mentioned, vertical and horizontal coordination. Now, the application at the field level is really a challenge. And at this point, I can only mention that there are currently some research and development in order to link with the local institution, with the local people. By the way, the rural revitalization strategy proposed by China 2018-2022 is focused on this horizontal and vertical coordination.
Okay.
But now, as I say, the challenge is certainly for China to implement it.
Right. Yeah. Well, in that sense, you also mentioned an issue, a formidable issue, how to implement both horizontal and vertical participation, coordination in the spirit of the SDGs. We have heard this now from every speaker. So the sharing of experience, what works and what doesn't work, I think hopefully will soon become a reality, and we could have more regular exchange of experience that could help different countries move forward, because the task is urgent and very complex. Thank you very much, Claude. We come to the last participant speaker, and that's Jin Tanaka. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right, great. So just to summarize a few points about the work you've done and what you're doing now, you're branch manager of UNISC International, which is a youth-led non-governmental organization with special consultative status to ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Commission of the UN. You're the branch manager of the University Student Chamber International, and you focus on climate issues as well as, of course, since COP26. And I imagine you might also be continuing with this with the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt this year in November. You belong to the Climate Youth Japan, which is one of the biggest youth-led organizations working with and about climate change policies, and you're the vice president of this organization. So you've been core member of many of the UNFCCC side events, And you moderated also the Youth Forum on Climate Social Reform, a forum, and the Conference of Youth, and you have contributed to the promotion of climate action from a youth perspective. I very much welcome to hear from a youth perspective how we could tackle SDG 15, having heard from our previous speakers about the complexity, the difficulty of doing much sustainable reforms in this particular area, and at the same time hearing that we need to urgently do our best to prevent further degradation of nature. You have the floor, please. I'm looking forward to listening to you.
Okay, thanks so much. So I'm going to share the screens for you. Okay. Okay, so how about now? Can you see me?
Yeah. Now just blow it up a bit to, yeah, fine, excellent.
Okay, thanks so much. So for the other country experience, I'm going to talking about the recovery for the biodiversity conservation from COVID-19 with youth engagement. Nowadays, due to the COVID-19 epidemic, more than 3 billion youth it's between the 14th to the 24th is facing in danger for the taking actions for the recovery and engage for the climate change, biodiversity, and the resolutions for the focusing about the nature infrastructures and agriculture and forestry. And this time, I'm going to strongly focus about my country experience and case studies and some of the engagement for the youth. So here's the outlines. Here's the biodiversity in Japan, and there's a four formations programs focus in the danger of the biodiversity, and also I'm going to talk about the youth engagement and initiatives, and then I'm going to conclude it. So here's my country, biodiversity in Japan. We have more than 90,000 species, and also the 3 million species, including these not classified, and has a rich biodiversity and an area of 38 million hectares. Because of that, we have our country has the strong length for the 3,000 kilometers, and so we have many trillions of the only developed countries as endemic species, likewise to the 40% of the terrestrial animal mammals and 60% of the reptiles and 80% of the amphibians. And also the nature environment has we have more than 600 islands, including our main islands, and each of the countries and each of the islands has some different and impediment to the biodiversity and development. So that's why we have the large wildlife species, including bears and deers, and only countries as monkeys as a natural environment existing in my country. Moreover, in the biodiversity, our country has covered by the forest. By 67% was covered by the forest and the total land areas. This is by far largest area among the developed countries. Likewise, the US has 27%. UK has UK has 21%, and China has covered by the 38%. So 67% is huge numbers compared to some developed countries in Asia Pacific countries and around the developed countries. And we have the compute for the 4 ocean currents, and the influence to the monsoons has resulted to the extremely rich marine plankton populations, compared to the 10 times for the planktons, the amount of the planktons compared to the other areas, and that makes to the rich marine biodiversity. And we have the more than 30 national parks, and but covered by the 10% of the country lands, and we are aiming to the more than 30% of the all land, include the not only to the land but also the marine areas, include the EEZ areas, to cover for the 30%. We're going to increase. We are recognizing to the or expanding to the nature conservation areas and setting up to the more national parks. So here's the current situation in the biodiversity in my country. However, there's many progress, and here's mainly 4 types of the topics we have the problem. The first problem is the destruction of biodiversity by invasive species. Likewise, from the 1990s, the number of the invasive species, like raccoons or big mouth fishes, and some lizards, has increasing, such as led by the destruction of biodiversity, such as Japan, by non-native species that have become wild, and then the genetic disturbance of the raccoons and other species, as well as the destruction of the nature species by taking away the habitat and of the species and frequent of the occurrences. And sometimes, likewise, they get to the mix to the invasive species and native species, and that's a destructive destruction of the gene diversity as well. So that's a problem. And we have mainly more than 3,000 species we are facing in danger for the invasive species. And that makes the more than 6,000 species have affected for these non-native species. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry for me. And the second issue is decline for the industries related to biodiversity. So these industries is strongly related to agriculture and forestry. But the decline in the local industries due to the COVID-19 epidemic has a result is a state of the decline industries such as agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. And that's strongly related to the biodiversity issues. And you can see the graph, just only 20 years, we got the numbers, half of the numbers decreased to the total number of the populations or the agriculture populations, and 68% has decreased in the forest industries, and 75% of the fisheries going to be has already has gone due to the kind of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power epidemic issues and the COVID-19 issues, and we also importing to the many fishes and agriculture stuff and fruits imported for the China, US, Canada, Australia, and so on. So that's why it's going to be less income for some big industries, so this is strongly damaged. And the population engaged agriculture, forestry, and fisheries is declining due to the low birth rate and aging populations, and population of industry has halved in the compared to the 20 years ago. You can look to the figure to the lifestyle. Just only 5 years. Just only 5 years, we're going to decrease to the more than 30% of the number of engaging to the persons who is engaged onto the forestries. We lost it, especially Hokkaido's and Iwate prefectures and Aki prefectures and Miyagi prefectures has strongly damaged due to the tsunamis and due to the earthquake. Likewise, recently we also facing to the some of the earthquake, and that makes to the more people going to go to the Tokyo's or Osaka's or Nagoya's, and that's going to be less populations in the local areas. That makes to the huge damage to the local economics. And third issue is land degradation due to the development and other human activities. This is strongly related to the past issues, but recurring to local industry due to the COVID-19. And you can see the graph. Only the left of the sufficiency is only 30%. Just only 50 years ago, we had a 94%. But still now, we're going to decrease the 30%, and this year has going to be showing up to the 20% due to importing to the many timbers from the Russia's and China's and Indonesia's and India's. And also the ratio of production of the domestic timber going to be decreased and decreased. And this record is the lowest record compared to some all developed countries, like with OECD, compared to the OECD average, compared to the G20 average, compared to the G7 average. Our country's domestic ratio, production ratio is going to be lower than any other average ratios. And also Japan's timber market in 2014, that's going to be a little bit old, but this year we're going to be less than 20% due to the extremely high ratios of importing for the USA and Canada and other countries. And recently we stopped to the importing to the some timbers for Russia, but still it's not good, not effect for the to increase the number of the domestic ratios. And also, average age of the population is now over 60 years old. In the agriculture areas, the average age is 68 years old, and in the fishery age is 64 years old, and in the forestry age is kind of the 70 years old. So less youth going to be engaged on these industries, and that makes the more harder to look after these forests and the industries and so on. And to this day, more than half of forests was planted by the humans, not nature forests. So the planted by humans has the less biodiversity, and that makes the flood and the drought and by the typhoons. So we have to focus onto these areas. If we cannot, maybe we're going to face every year we're going to lose the many human life and the habitat and infrastructures, including to the energy supplies as well. And here's the fourth reason: frequently extreme weather events from global environmental changes. Now today, we are facing to the first typhoon for this year, and we also facing to the extremely high and low temperatures. Today, I live in Japan. Here it's 10 degrees Celsius, but yesterday it's 25 degrees Celsius. So and tomorrow it's going to be 26 degrees Celsius. So this year it's going to be facing to the extremely high temperatures and low temperatures and facing in dangers, and makes to be more harder for all the animals and plants to growing up. And also the increasing the average temperatures. Now I live in the Fukuoka, south part of Japan, and we recorded to the more than 2 degrees Celsius for the temperature for average due to the global warming and the shrinking to the habitats of the corals and the endemic species. And also in Japan, 20 to 30% of the plants and animals are at risk of extinction. Its number of the 6,900 species is facing in danger for the looking to the red list. Here's the red list for the species in Japan, but we're going to increase the numbers, and every year we publish into the red books, but the species of the number in the listed in the red list going to be increasing faster and faster. And also for season going to be disappears. Here we recognize as here's the spring, but like the more than 25 Celsius, it means the summers or close to the summer. So we're going to lose to the spring and fall. Just only we have the extremely hot, extremely muggy weathers in the likewise the summer seasons, or extremely cold weathers likewise winter seasons. So that's strongly damage for the biodiversity and forest and infrastructures, and it's changed to the vegetation, resulting in wild fluctuations and temperatures. And
Mr. Tanaka, I'm sorry, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, I'm going to round up. So what we do now is developing biodiversity conservation activities in youth. So we present the youth opinions in the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry on the implementation of biodiversity conservation in relation to climate change issues, energy transition, and water resource conservation. Likewise, I'm also the member of the Yango, one of the biggest youth constituency recognized by the UNSC. And also, I'm also the member of the UNEP Stock Plan 50 Youth Task Force. We also engaged into the many conferences. Likewise, just a week ago, we also have the UN ECOSOC Youth Forum and Asia Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development, and we debated to the many implementations and flows directly to decision makers for the international conference. And just a week later, we also have the Asia Pacific Water Summit in Kumamoto, south part of Japan, for the talking about the biodiversity conservation, forest management, and water management. As we are setting up to the side event of the youth forums. And also recently, youth organization and civil society groups are organizing international conference, likewise the YCAP or SDF forum and so on, for the biodiversity conservation online. We are concerning about the COVID-19 epidemic. And also, so youth group has been working together to help the tree planting and also the sinking mountains and forests owned by the companies and the government to ensure that they receive their best care. So recently, so only from this year, we increased the number of engagement. Recently, as the average number of the engagement for the planting tree is 30,000 people, but this year we got to the 45,000 people. We are collecting the youth activities. And also, we are calling to the youth and young students to the building to the partnership to the utilize their respective positions to increase the green jobs, like the forestry and the agriculture and so on. We are giving to their land and supporting to some professional the skills and also the giving to ensuring to the career steps to the forestry and agriculture experience as an internship and externship. So here's the conclusions. Our country has the wild biodiversity, which is endemic to the country, but there's more than 3,000 endangered species, and more than 9,000 species are facing in danger in the listed in the list as the latest Japan's list system. And ecosystem is out of the balance due to lack of the care and due to the decrease in habitat areas caused by development and the over-explorations. And also, we also face in dangers for this population in agriculture and forestry. And ecosystems are being distributed to introduction to the invasive species. And we also facing in dangers to the change to our activities, but still we could not solve every problem. Just only we can plant trees or we can advocate it. So we have to contribute to cooperate and contribute to all of the areas. We are cooperating outside of the countries. We are cooperation with the countries and we cooperation with the government and the companies and so on. So now for this year, we started to making the cooperations to each country's ambassadors setting up the side event to addressing to the decision makers and delivering to the policy proposals, which is including to the pact and contract for the comprehensive cooperations to the conferences and forestry conference. So that's my presentations. Thank you for attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tanaka. It's alarming. I didn't realize that, as you said, 20 to 30% of plants and animals are threatened to be extinct, which I had no idea about that. That sounds alarming. And also I took note of what you said, that the average age, if I got this correctly, in agriculture in Japan, people are 60 years of age. Which
yes,
in agriculture, in agriculture, where you have to do manual work, to be 60 years of age, it can be quite difficult to stay active as a farmer. So what are the solutions about being more, let's say, sustainable, more nature-based agriculture, less pesticide, to do, let's say, a positive agriculture for the future, when the people who are doing farming at the moment are growing older and older and soon will not be able to be farmers anymore? Are the young planning to move into rural areas and take up the responsibility of doing more, let's say, sustainable agriculture, which will be also preserving biodiversity, but produce food in a meaningful manner, other than just importing food, where, as you know, it's the case for my country, Switzerland, as well as for Singapore, where food is imported, but by importing, you import also a bad footprint, because the food produced in other countries might be, in that sense, very harmful to nature. So what is the youth going to do about agriculture in the future?
Thanks for the giving questions, Raymond. Thanks for that's good questions. That time we developed into some of the automatical sensors, likewise this month we developed into some of the sensors. Yeah, we developed some of the sensors. It's going to be showed to the analysis for data for two sets and to get stabilized to the looking to the agriculture areas. So also we introduce into some of the drones and some robots to more effective to increase in the area of the agriculture, and also try to look into the forest and the forest industries, and sometimes we also try to hearing for the elderly persons to make the manuals, because as you know our country has a different characteristic for each areas. So we have to consider about some of some local characteristics and try to growing up to some of the vegetables and the agriculture systems and save to the biodiversity. So there are three ways. Likewise, first is developing into some of the technologies and introducing, and second one is hearing from to the every person's technologies and techniques, and also try to make the manuals. And third way is try to make kind of making innovations in the systems for supporting to the youth for the career step for the agricultures. So that's three ways what we're doing now. And also I got the questions: what actions that you have observed as effective to resolve this trend in the biodiversity? Okay, that's a great questions.
Thank you very much for your answer, because the issue is similar in other countries where the younger persons are debating whether or not they could contribute to a better agriculture and move to rural areas, but sometimes the incentive system by the government is not conducive to that. So there's a lot of maybe, I hope that all the solutions that you've just presented right now, hopefully that could be also presented at the next COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. So others can learn from what you and your group are doing in Japan. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm coming to the end, and I see Lichia has her finger up.
Yeah. I just wanted to hear, maybe a short sentence, because I think what you said is very, both you and Raymond are talking, this conversation is very pertinent in the sense that we see, and also that early on, Madame Darbari also mentioned it, there's a general migration outside of the rural economy. Right? So I'm just wondering what experiments or what's initial steps that have been tried in Japan and you observe as being attractive and actually, promote a migration back to the rural economy rather than the other way around.
Yes. Thanks for giving that great questions. Now we setting up to some of the platforms for the exchanging to the back to the rural areas. We are providing to some houses and some of the fields, and also adding to some of the cooperation with the communities. Likewise, the reasons why they're going to go to the rural areas, because they like to earn to some more stable salaries, and they like to get the more informations. So that time, we can approach the three ways. First, we can provide to the houses and some stable industries. We can provide it via cooperate to the local government, and they can more easily to live in. And the second way is we also cooperate with the companies to introduce in teleworks. So they do not have they don't no need to go to stay or close to the companies, because they can do the telework, so they can work anytime and anywhere. Sure. And third one is they like to get more information. Likewise, there's some digital divide or information divide to the local and rural areas in Japan. So to fix the situations, we also provided some infrastructure to the online. Likewise, I also live into some of the local areas, but provide some of the materials and staff and technologies, and we provide some update information to everywhere you write. So we have a fix to provide some of the materials to fix some of the reasons why they or to take away some of the reasons why they like to go to the rural areas. And
right.
For and just time, we also try to getting back to the youth from the rural areas to local areas. We go to every year we have the 500,000 persons going to back from the rural areas to the local areas. And here's my county also got the increased number for them. Every year we got the 3,000 persons from the rural areas. So maybe it's going to be a great base, and we try to expand to these case studies to all over the countries.
Yeah, could you just add this information in the website so we could also follow up on and read up on this very important question?
Yeah, if you have already maybe written up on what you just now shared in response to Lichia's question, it will be certainly very useful also for and interesting for others in other countries to read about that.
Okay, of course I will do it. I will do it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm coming towards the end, and I think we should move to the next slide. Jane. Yeah. Just to a few comments in closing. There will be a questionnaire that will be sent to you, and we look forward to your responses and suggestions for improvement. It's very important. It will only take you about 10 minutes to fill it out, and please do fill it in and send us your comments. And I thank you for your partnership. It was a fantastic session. We had wonderful speakers, and I'm a bit apologizing for going too long. I think it was worthwhile to extend a little bit, but I should now stop talking and hand over to Lichia. Thank you very much to all the speakers and to all the participants who listened to the presentations. Lichia, it's yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I just like to say a few words for, to conclude this 4-day sessions of this year's executive training course hosted by the UNOSD. And my thoughts, is a little bit too complex. So I thought, the easier way to do it is just to share a few takeaways for me personally that I would continue to work on and think about. So let me just sort of quickly read them so I don't take too much time. The first point is about the indivisibility of the 2030 agenda. It was very much, again, supported and proven from case to case, no matter what we are talking about. Either we are talking about the land, of the issue of the land degradation, the pollution of the ocean, the gender issue concerning women, and quality of education. So, all in all, I think, we would need deeper analysis of the causes underlying dynamics because of this interconnection, and also happening concurrently. So it's not just linear, but it's a circular relationship, so that, we need to have a much better data and analysis. The second thing is, it strikes me when we start talking about the small land farmers, we talk about youth in the rural area, the women in the sort of a natural habitat, the necessity to remember leaving no one behind. This particular principle is become more pronounced and relevant than ever. There are blind spots and groupthink very common in the policy making process. So we need to make sure that the leaving no one behind principle will be one of the important deciding threshold in the future policy considerations. Next, please. The third takeaway is really when we talk about gender issue, gender equality. It is very important to also add, additional dimension, which is economic empowerment and participation, in addition to human rights, political participation issues. And I think, these women's empowerment and economic participation would not happen if we could not deal with the challenge of providing quality education no matter where the person is, and that will be a minimum sort of a success criteria. And also thinking about together with skill development, which reflects the job market demands, whether it in the rural or urban areas, and access to finance. But one much more subtle dimension in thinking about this is actually the compatibility of value in terms of value and norms regarding gender roles. Whether when we're talking about greater participation, greater access to the economic opportunities, that some of these operating under the water mechanisms are actually blocking the potential success. And the fourth point that I'm thinking, or the fifth point I'm thinking, is about importance of solidarity. Today we heard the government of India is actually but launched a major effort of grouping small landholders and farmers together so they could create greater economy of scale. But also I think through this self-organization, they have a greater opportunity to co-create in terms of the environment they operate in, and also to achieve self-reliance of such a collective bargaining and the impact. And I think the effort that we heard in Kyrgyzstan regarding women's organization at the subnational level. We heard also the story from India about women organized to protect their, the virgin forestry, and also the other engagement that we heard today from the different civil society groups in different international fora. All this is contributing to the sustainable future. But most importantly, it trickles down or maybe trickles up, by achieving greater sustainable livelihood for more people. Next, please. My last takeaways is to realize that one of the least understood aspects of our daily life is actually the freshwater interrelations with the ocean ecosystem. I never thought about or didn't know that actually the depletion of the bottom floor fish, which are not so much valuable, but it's important to feed the other fish in the ecosystem, by taking them away and out to feed our agro fishery industry, is actually creating a double bind issues. So that's triggered me that I want to know more about that. But I think from our surveys, it becomes even more urgent is to address the policy and the action gaps. It was not necessary the knowledge or just the resources, but it's something in that mix that policies and international treaties are not putting into action, achieve what it could, what these instruments could achieve. So let me just say, if we indeed follow this human development approach in harmony with nature, so that our business behavior, our living behavior, our lifestyle, and all that will be, coherent, and we could achieve sustainable development, then the participation of citizens and the beneficiaries of the policy making need to be, a safeguard measure of all our effort. And I have one question to ask at the end of my small reflection and takeaways. Next page, please. many of the vulnerable and marginalized groups, including small farmers, subsistence fishers, indigenous groups, informal workers, many of these groups consist of women and children, often rely on degraded land, fragile ecosystems, and natural environments for their survival. So my parting question to myself and to our whole community is that should their ecosystem services be encouraged, recognized, enabled, and compensated? And Ramon earlier mentioned that Claude worked a lot about the biotrade, and that is in the spirit of this particular question. So can we imagine a fair and more inclusive value chains with more equitable access for all stakeholders? Could this ecosystem compensation be an additional measure to reach the bottom of the pyramid for those invisible communities to participate in a life with dignity and a promise of the 2030 agenda? So with this few notes, I wanted to thank you all for participating and to give your insight and very valuable time so that we could gather online once again and to discuss some of the issues that close to our hearts. A few words about knowledge management of this process. Next slide, please. We were interested and eager to hear what are key takeaways from you. And the way we approach this, Ramon already mentioned, is to use an evaluation form so that we can hear your voice. So this particular evaluation form is easy to use. However, it goes a little bit deeper than the fundamental design questions about interactions, the lens, and so on. So I hope that you will take the time to look at it and to reply and send it back. This will help us to gain insight in making the future UNOSD ETC courses more effective in addressing awareness and knowledge gaps. Next one, please. I want to thank everyone who have taken the time and the trouble when signing up and answered our pre-workshop survey. And your responses have helped us to steer, our very limited sort of attention within this course due to its short time span to focus on something closer to your interest and your need. I hope we have, through our endeavor, we have been able to do some of that. We wish you great success in moving the 2030 agenda forward and meeting the SDG targets within the resources available to you, but also, most important of all, is your ingenuity and creativity and ability to innovate. And we have heard from quite a few young activists who are engaged in promoting SDGs, who are engaged in achieving SDGs today and also the other days. So they are really sort of good example to energize, the older generations to also follow the model and to do so. So I thank you and wish you a very, at least in some countries, a very good Easter, and in other countries, a nice finishing of the week. As the saying goes, when I was in graduate school, thanks God it's Thursday. So, I wish you well, and until next time.
Thank you very much, Lichia. I'll take over. So I'd like to close. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the UN Office for Sustainable Development, or UNOSD, I'd like to thank the speakers and presenters of tonight's session, but also all the speakers and presenters who shared their experience, knowledge, and wisdom during the all executive training course for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development over the last 4 days. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's session as well as the 3 other sessions of the executive training course, or ETC, as some of our former participants call this flagship activities of UNOSD, our office. Above all, we hope that through the presentation and discussions during the week, this training course has been helping you understand better the issues around the HLPF and particularly the 5 SDGs that will be the focus of attention at the HLPF next July. It is also our hope that your participation in all or parts of this international training course, despite the challenges due to the course format that is being held online, or with only 4 sessions of only 2.5 hours online at sometimes difficult time zones for you, will nevertheless help you understand better the issues around the HLPF and partially the 5 SDGs to be the focus of attention at the HLPF next July. We hope also that your participation in the training course will help you be better prepared to engage more actively in accelerating the implementation of the SDGs, review and report on the progress made in your respective countries. As you know, 2022 is the midpoint of a timeline that was established in 2015 with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. 2022 also marks the 50th anniversary of the 1972 UN Conference on UN Environment in Stockholm, the first ever UN conference on sustainable development. And of course, there are also other major UN conferences coming soon, like the Ocean Conference next June, July, the COP27 in November, and the UN Water Conference in March 2023. These major UN conferences will need inputs from all UN member states in order to find solutions to the so many challenges countries are facing. And it is undeniable that you will have an important role to play in these discussions, preparations leading to these conferences, but also in implementing the solutions that will be put forward. And we hope that this executive training course for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has made some contribution to prepare you for the task ahead of you. Please make use of the lessons learned over the last 4 days and share them with your colleagues and partners, and translate these lessons and new knowledge gained into sustainable solutions that make sense in your national context to achieve sustainable development within the remaining 8 years of the decade of actions for the SDGs. Once again, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their generosity in sharing their experience, knowledge, and wisdom during the whole training course. I would also like to thank Professor Raymond Saner for his contribution as a speaker earlier this week and also as our facilitator moderator today. I'd like to thank Ms. Lichia Saner-Yiu, Professor, our consultant, for her excellent work in organizing the executive training course and facilitating and moderating the sessions for the first 3 days. I'd like to thank the colleagues from UNDESA in New York, particularly Mr. Alexander Trepelkov, officer in charge of the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, UNDESA, for his contribution on the first day of the training. I'd like to address special thanks to Mr. Chong-Kyu Park, head of UNOSD, for his contribution and for his support. And of course, I'd like to thank once more the UNOSD staff and interns who worked very hard in the shadow, making this session and all the week, all the sessions very successful. Without, we didn't feel their presence exactly because they have performed very well during the whole training course. And finally, I'd like to thank all the participants who joined us during the week. I'm looking forward to meeting you all in person during the next edition of the executive training for policymakers on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development in a few months from now. I'd like to wish you a good day, evening, or night, depending on where you are, and I'd like to thank you very much again. Goodbye.